Nestled in the rolling hills of Los Angeles, the elegant home of Rosalind Russell seemed to be a place of serenity. The celebrated actress lived there for several years, enjoying its Art Deco charm and expansive views of the city below. However, after her death in 1976, whispers of unexplained occurrences began to surround the property, tarnishing its once glamorous reputation. The first documented incident came from a couple who moved into the house in the early 1980s. They described hearing soft, melodic humming late at night, echoing through the grand hallways. At first, they dismissed it as noise from a neighbor. But one evening, while hosting a dinner party, the humming grew louder, interrupting their conversation. Guests claimed it sounded like a woman softly singing, her voice tinged with an old-world charm. The eerie part? No one else was in the house, and the source of the sound remained elusive. A year later, a paranormal investigator was invited to the home after the new owners experienced repeated disturbances. Lights flickered without explanation, and the scent of a delicate floral perfume often lingered in the air, even when no one had worn any. The investigator set up cameras and audio recorders throughout the house. One evening, while sitting in the living room, he spotted a figure standing at the top of the grand staircase. The silhouette was unmistakably feminine, dressed in what appeared to be a 1940s-style evening gown. The investigator froze, unable to move or speak, as the figure turned slowly and began descending the staircase. As she reached the last step, the figure vanished into thin air. Reviewing the footage later revealed nothing, only the chilling silence of an empty house. The final, most unsettling account came from a housekeeper who worked at the residence for nearly a decade. She recounted hearing Rosalind's voice, particularly in the library, where the actress had once spent countless hours reading scripts and letters. On one occasion, the housekeeper entered the room after hearing someone call her name, only to find it empty. The voice had been so clear that she thought someone was standing behind her. When she turned, there was nothing but the faint rustle of the curtains. Over the years, the house has become a point of fascination for paranormal enthusiasts. While no one can definitively prove the presence of Rosalind Russell's spirit, the accounts of those who lived and worked there remain consistent. The house is a place where the past lingers, and the echoes of its former occupant refuse to fade. In the years following the housekeeper's experience, the incidents in Rosalind Russell's home seemed to intensify. The humming that had once been soft and sporadic now echoed nightly, as if the walls themselves carried the tune. Guests who stayed overnight often reported hearing whispers indistinct, yet unmistakably feminine. Some claimed the whispers seemed to respond to their thoughts, almost as if the house were listening. One such guest, a journalist researching a book on Hollywood legends, recounted a chilling event. While typing late into the night in the library, the room's atmosphere shifted. The air became heavier, colder. As he reached for his coffee, his laptop screen blinked off, leaving him in darkness. A moment later, the faint glow of a lamp illuminated a shadow on the far wall, a figure seated in the very armchair he had been admiring earlier that evening. He described the silhouette as serene yet unsettling, and though he couldn't see its face, he felt an undeniable sense that he was being watched. When the journalist dared to speak, asking aloud if anyone was there, the lamp flickered twice. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. His laptop powered back on, the cursor blinking on a blank document with one word typed, "Stay." One of the most perplexing accounts came from a woman who visited the house during an open house event years later, when the property was briefly put up for sale. The woman, an older resident of Los Angeles, claimed she had met Rosalind Russell at a party decades earlier and had been intrigued by the idea of seeing her home. As she wandered through the rooms, she felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu, as if she had been there before. When she reached the staircase, she froze. A woman in an evening gown stood halfway up, staring directly at her. The woman's expression wasn't angry, but it held a deep sadness, as though she wanted to say something but couldn't. Suddenly, the woman spoke not with words, but in a voice the visitor later described as inside her head. The message was clear: you shouldn't be here. Terrified, the visitor fled the house, but not before snapping a photo on her phone. When she later reviewed the image, it appeared normal at first glance. But in the reflection of a nearby mirror, a faint figure could be seen, dark, blurred, and distinctly human. Today, the house remains occupied, though the current owners are notoriously private. However, rumors persist. Neighbors have reported seeing lights on in rooms that are supposedly unused and hearing faint strains of music on quiet evenings. One urban legend speaks of a locked room on the second floor that no one dares to enter. It's said that when workers attempted to pry the door open during a renovation, they heard a woman's voice screaming, "Leave it alone!" The crew, shaken, abandoned the project without finishing the job. The mystery of Rosalind Russell's house continues to deepen. Who or what remains within its walls? And why does it seem as though the house itself resists change, holding on to a past that refuses to let go? As the years passed, the whispers and sightings became part of the house's lore, but the owners were hesitant to discuss it publicly. However, one evening, an incident occurred that no one in the household could ignore. A friend of the family, a skeptic known for his logical explanations of paranormal claims, decided to spend the night in the house. Armed with cameras and recording devices, he set up his equipment in various rooms, determined to debunk the tales. The night began uneventfully, with only the usual creaks and groans of an aging house. Then, just past midnight, the sounds began. Footsteps echoed through the hallway outside the guest room, slow, deliberate, and impossibly loud for such a carpeted space. The skeptic, half asleep, initially dismissed it as one of the homeowners moving about. But when he opened the door, the hallway was empty. The footsteps continued, now heading up the stairs. The man followed cautiously, clutching his flashlight. As he ascended, the steps grew louder, heavier, until he could feel vibrations through the wooden banister. When he reached the top, the sound stopped abruptly. The air was thick with silence, but as he turned, the door to the locked room at the end of the hallway creaked open, just an inch. The skeptic hesitated, debating whether to enter. The door, which no one had dared to open in years, seemed to beckon him. Steeling his nerves, he pushed it fully open. The room inside was untouched by time, with vintage furniture covered in white sheets and a layer of dust that suggested decades of disuse. A faint smell of lavender lingered in the air, familiar and unsettling at the same time. As he stepped inside, the door swung shut behind him, clicking into place. The skeptic turned quickly, his flashlight beam slicing through the shadows, but no one was there. Then, in the corner of the room, he noticed a vanity mirror. Its surface was fogged as though someone had just breathed on it. Slowly, words began to appear, written by an invisible hand. "You were warned." The flashlight flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. In the silence, he could hear breathing, shallow, deliberate, and just inches away. The next morning, the skeptic left without a word, abandoning his equipment. When the owners retrieved the devices, they found hours of footage. Most was unremarkable, but the final recording from the hallway camera was chilling. It captured the man ascending the stairs, then pausing at the top, staring at something off camera. He mumbled, "No, that's impossible," before stepping toward the locked room. The last moments of the footage were chaotic. A loud crashing noise, the camera tilting, and a single frame of the man's face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. After that, only static remained. The skeptic never spoke of his experience again. When questioned by friends, he would only say, "Some doors are meant to stay closed." Not long after, the owners sold the house quietly, moving out under the pretense of wanting a change of scenery. The property changed hands several times, each owner staying for a shorter period than the last. Rumors grew wilder with each passing year. Sightings of a figure in the upstairs windows, screams echoing in the middle of the night, and that persistent humming melody drifting through the halls. Then, one day, a new tenant arrived, someone who claimed to have no fear of ghosts. But when they began renovations on the property, the disturbances reached a fever pitch. Workers reported tools disappearing, paint spilling across walls with no one nearby, and strange, rhythmic tapping that seemed to follow them from room to room. And then, one morning, the construction crew refused to return, citing an incident that they refused to explain. When the owner pressed them, one worker simply said, "You should leave before she makes you. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." The new tenant, a retired architect named Evelyn, prided herself on her skepticism of the supernatural. She dismissed the workers' stories as mere superstitions and decided to oversee the renovations herself. Determined to restore the house to its former glory, Evelyn began spending her days and nights on site. First, the activity seemed to settle. The strange tapping noises and misplaced tools stopped, and she convinced herself that the house's eerie reputation was exaggerated. But then came the whispers. Late one evening, while sketching renovation plans in the library, Evelyn heard faint murmurs drifting from the hallway. They were too quiet to make out, yet they carried an unmistakable urgency. She stepped into the corridor, expecting to find a draft or an old vent amplifying outside noises. Instead, the air was still, the house unnaturally silent. As she turned to go back to her work, a voice soft, almost gentle, called her name. "Evelyn." She froze. The voice was unmistakably close, but the hallway was empty. Gathering her courage, she called out, "Who's there?" For a moment there was no response. Then, from the direction of the locked room, the voice came again. This time firmer, "You shouldn't be here." Evelyn decided to ignore the incident, chalking it up to fatigue. But the next morning, she noticed something strange in her blueprints. Her careful sketches of the renovations had been altered. In thick, dark pencil, someone or something had scrawled over her plans, marking large X's on specific rooms. Most unsettling of all, the locked room was circled repeatedly, with the words "No entry" written in shaky, uneven script. Frustrated but undeterred, Evelyn dismissed the markings as a prank. She redrew her plans and pressed on with the renovations. Yet each night the whispers returned. They grew louder, more insistent, as if the house itself was trying to speak. And each morning, her blueprints were marked again, the warnings becoming more elaborate. One day, while inspecting the foundation, Evelyn found an old wooden box buried beneath the floorboards. Inside was a collection of photographs, faded but intact. They depicted Rosalind Russell in various poses, always in the same parts of the house. By the staircase, near the library, and, most curiously, in front of the locked room. In every photo, her expression was serene, but her eyes seemed to carry a silent plea. Unable to resist her growing curiosity, Evelyn decided it was time to open the locked room. She recruited a contractor to help, and together they forced the heavy door open. The hinges groaned as the room revealed itself, a preserved snapshot of another era. Dusty furniture sat untouched, and the faint scent of lavender filled the air. In the corner stood an antique wardrobe, its mirrored doors slightly ajar. Evelyn approached cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As she reached for the handle, she caught her reflection in the glass, and behind her, the faint outline of a woman in an evening gown. Evelyn spun around, but the room was empty. When she turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. The contractor, visibly shaken, refused to continue and left the house immediately. But Evelyn stayed, unable to shake the feeling that the house was trying to show her something. That night, she heard Rosalind's voice again, clearer than ever. "You have to stop. Don't wake it." Determined to uncover the truth, Evelyn began to investigate the room more thoroughly. While tapping on the walls, she discovered a hollow section behind the wardrobe. After moving the heavy piece aside, she found a small, concealed door. It was old, its wood warped and splintered, with no obvious way to open it. The whispers returned, louder now, almost frantic. As Evelyn leaned closer to inspect the door, a chill ran down her spine. A single word was etched into the wood, as though scratched by trembling hands, "Warning." Her instincts screamed at her to stop, but her curiosity was overpowering. She retrieved a crowbar and began prying the door open. As the wood splintered and gave way, the whispers abruptly ceased, replaced by a deep, resonant silence that seemed to pulse through the house. Evelyn hesitated, suddenly aware of how alone she was and how quiet everything had become. The door creaked open, revealing a pitch-black passage that seemed to descend far below the foundation of the house. A faint, rhythmic sound echoed from the depths, like a heartbeat. The lavender scent grew stronger, mingling with something else, something metallic and sharp. And then, from the darkness, a single word echoed up to her, spoken in a voice that wasn't Rosalind's but something far older, colder. Welcome. Evelyn hesitated at the edge of the passage, gripping the crowbar tightly as if it could ward off whatever lay below. The rhythmic sound grew louder, steady and hypnotic, pulling her toward the darkness. Against her better judgment, she stepped inside, her flashlight casting a narrow beam that barely pierced the void. The air was damp and suffused with that strange blend of lavender and metal, each breath heavier than the last. The passage twisted and turned, descending steeply until it opened into a vast, hidden chamber. The walls were lined with aged, crumbling bricks, their surfaces etched with symbols she didn't recognize. In the center of the room stood a wooden table, and on it lay a leather-bound book, its cover cracked and stained with time. Evelyn approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing unnaturally in the space. The rhythmic sound was loudest here, emanating from the very walls, as though the house itself had a beating heart. As she reached for the book, the air grew colder, and the flashlight began to flicker. The moment her fingers touched the worn leather, the whispers returned, now a cacophony of voices pleading, warning, and crying out in anguish. She opened the book, and its brittle pages revealed detailed accounts of seances, rituals, and sacrifices conducted in the house long before Rosalind Russell ever lived there. The final entry, written in a trembling hand, read, "It will never let us go. The house lives. It chooses." As Evelyn processed the chilling revelation, a low growl resonated through the chamber. She spun around, but there was nothing there, only shadows that seemed to shift and writhe in the edges of her vision. The rhythmic sound shifted, becoming irregular, frantic, like a predator's heartbeat as it prepared to strike. Then she saw it, a figure emerging from the darkness. It wasn't Rosalind, nor any human form. It was tall and grotesque, its shape constantly shifting, as though it was made of the shadows themselves. Its eyes, or what passed for them, glowed faintly, burning into her soul. The voices grew louder, now screaming in unison, "Leave. It knows you're here." Evelyn stumbled backward, clutching the book to her chest. The entity moved closer, its form solidifying into something more human yet infinitely wrong. She turned and fled, the passage narrowing as if the walls were closing in, trying to trap her. The rhythmic sound now pounded in her ears, almost drowning out her panicked breaths. Bursting back into the locked room, Evelyn slammed the wardrobe into place, sealing the hidden passage. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving her in a silence so profound it was deafening. She collapsed to the floor, clutching the book, her mind reeling. Over the following days, Evelyn researched the book's contents, piecing together the house's sinister history. It had been built on land used for occult practices, and the entity she encountered was not a ghost but a manifestation of those rituals, something ancient, bound to the house yet feeding off the lives it touched. Rosalind's presence wasn't malevolent. She was trying to warn anyone who dared disturb the fragile balance keeping the entity at bay. Evelyn moved out shortly after, leaving the house abandoned once more. She left the book with a paranormal researcher, who later reported that it disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Rumors about the house continued to spread, each new owner staying for a shorter period than the last, until no one dared to live there. Years later, a group of urban explorers broke into the house, eager to document its eerie reputation. They live-streamed their experience, laughing at the dusty halls and mocking the supposed hauntings. But as they reached the locked room, their signal abruptly cut out. The next morning, authorities found their equipment abandoned and the wardrobe door ajar. The explorers were never seen again. On the dusty mirror, written in an unfamiliar hand, was a single word: "Leave." The house remains empty to this day, its windows dark, its doors tightly shut. But sometimes, on quiet nights, Passersby claim to hear faint whispers and the sound of humming a tune unmistakably tied to the legacy of Rosalind Russell, still trying to protect the living from the darkness that lingers within her former home. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.